Hello, girls and boys. Welcome to Storytime Fun. We hope you enjoy it. So today's story is the last story in the Disney Princess Happily Ever After Stories book, Tales of Love and Friendship. And today's story is called The Magic of True Love. It's a Disney Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time story. Once upon a time, there lived a kind-hearted girl named Cinderella. Lady Tremaine, her cruel stepmother, and Anastasia and Drizella, her two spoiled stepsisters, forced her to do all the cooking, cleaning, and other housework. One fateful night, everything changed. With a little help from her fairy godmother, Cinderella was able to attend the royal ball, where she met and fell in love with the prince. Soon the couple married, and Cinderella and the prince spent all of their time together. Their lives were happier than they'd ever had imagined they could be. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters were not happy, though. Since Cinderella wasn't around, they had to do all the chores. Anastasia and Drizella hated washing dishes and scrubbing floors, and they were constantly fighting with each other. One day, Anastasia saw Cinderella and the prince in the distance, and she followed the couple into the woods. Cinderella's fairy godmother had surprised them with an anniversary party. Anastasia watched as the fairy godmother pointed her wand at Cinderella and the prince and said, "Bibbidi-bobbidi-boo," at Cinderella and the prince. And suddenly the royal couple was wearing the clothes they had worn on the night they had met. Ooh! "So that's how Cinderella did it," exclaimed Anastasia. "Magic!" She was still jealous of her stepsister. As the fairy godmother sang to them, the prince took Cinderella in his arms and danced with her in the moonlight. At the song's big finale, the fairy godmother got so excited that she threw up her arms and her wand flew through the air. It landed right in front of Anastasia. "Perfect!" Anastasia exclaimed. She snatched the wand and ran away. Oh, no. As soon as she got home, Anastasia showed the wand to her mother and sister and told them the magic words. Lady Tremaine was fascinated. "Do you know what this means, girls?" she said. "Power, riches, revenge." She picked up the wand. "I call upon all the forces of the universe," she continued. "Bibbidi-bobbidi-boo. Reverse the moon and sun. Turn back the tide and time. Unravel Cinderella's happily ever after to the moment my troubles began." Suddenly, the clock turned back a year. It was the exact moment that the Grand Duke had arrived with the glass slipper Cinderella had left at the ball. Lady Tremaine and her daughters welcomed the Grand Duke into the sitting room. They knew that whoever's foot fit into the slipper would marry the prince. Using the magic wand, Lady Tremaine secretly stretched the glass slipper to fit Anastasia's rather large foot. The Grand Duke declared that the prince's bride-to-be had been found. Cinderella watched the whole thing from upstairs. She was confused. "I danced with the prince. "That was my slipper," she told her stepmother. She pulled the matching glass slipper from her pocket. Her stepmother snatched the slipper and dropped it, shattering it into many pieces. "Whatever you think happened last night was a dream," she said, and left for the palace with Anastasia. Jacques and Gus, Cinderella's two mouse friends, tried to comfort her. "Maybe just a big mistake," suggested Jacques. Suddenly, Cinderella felt better. "Of course, a mistake. If I see him again, everything will be all right." With her friends tucked safely in her pocket, Cinderella set out for the palace. Once there, she was able to get past the guards by pretending she was a servant. When Cinderella finally found the prince, he didn't remember her at all. He told her he was going to marry Anastasia that very night. Cinderella was heartbroken. Luckily, Jacques and Gus discovered the truth. The wicked stepmother had put a spell on the prince to make him fall in love with Anastasia. "She made him forget who I am," Cinderella said to her mouse friends. "We have to get that wand." Cinderella watched through a keyhole as her stepsisters and stepmother locked the wand in a dresser drawer. Jacques and Gus would have to retrieve it. The mice got the wand, but unfortunately, Lucifer the cat began to chase them. "The wand!" Lady Tremaine cried. "Mice!" screamed Anastasia. The mice darted in the door and tossed the wand to Cinderella. Soon the trio found the prince. Cinderella pointed the wand at him, but before she could finish undoing the spell, the guards appeared. Lady Tremaine had told them Cinderella was a thief. "I'm not a thief," Cinderella insisted. She turned to the prince. "You're under a spell. That's why you don't remember me." She reached for him, and their hands touched. Instantly, the prince felt a connection. "The poor child," Lady Tremaine said, "obviously out of her mind." Confused, the prince soon left. Lady Tremaine turned to the guards. "Put her on the next ship leaving the kingdom. I want her banished forever," she ordered. The guards obeyed. After Cinderella had been led away, Jacques and Gus showed the prince the other glass slipper, which the bluebirds had glued back together. They told him that he had been under a spell and that his true love was on a ship that was about to sail away. The prince raced out the door. Once he and Cinderella were reunited on the ship, the spell was broken. Without hesitation, the prince asked for Cinderella's hand in marriage, and she happily agreed. When the couple arrived at the palace, the prince ordered the guards to arrest Anastasia, Drizella, and their mother. But they were nowhere to be found. They had used the magic wand to make themselves vanish. That evening, as Cinderella prepared for her wedding, her stepmother appeared. "How lovely you look," Lady Tremaine said. "It appears you were right, Cinderella. The prince does want to marry you, and marry you he shall." Then she summoned Anastasia. The sinister stepmother had used the wand to change her so she looked exactly like Cinderella. They were going to trick the prince into marrying Anastasia. Cinderella was horrified, but her stepmother didn't care. She pointed the wand at Cinderella and the mice. Magic sparkles surrounded them, and then poof, they were gone. A moment later, Cinderella and the mice reappeared in a pumpkin coach. Lucifer had been changed into an evil coachman whose job was to get rid of Cinderella once and for all. Cinderella grabbed hold of the vine that formed Lucifer's seat and pulled it hard enough to send him flying off the coach. Splat! He landed into a muddy stream and turned back into a cat. Jacques and Gus detached the horseman's harness. Then Cinderella scooped up the mice and jumped onto the horse's back. She grabbed the reins and stopped the galloping horse right at the edge of the cliff. Oh, phew! They were safe. Well, I'm not going to miss my own wedding, Cinderella declared. They rode toward the palace as quickly as they could. Inside the palace, the wedding ceremony was already underway. "Do you, Cinderella, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband?" the bishop asked. But Anastasia was having second thoughts. She wanted to marry someone who loved her for who she really was, not who she was pretending to be. I don't. Just then, the real Cinderella ran down the aisle. Everyone gasped. There were two Cinderellas. Lady Tremaine and Drizella appeared. They looked very upset. "You spoiled little ingrate," the wicked stepmother hissed at her daughter. She pointed the magic wand at both Cinderella and Anastasia. "Bibbidi-bobbidi-boo!" "No!" exclaimed the prince. He pulled out his sword to protect Cinderella and Anastasia. The spell from the wand reflected off the sword and hit Lady Tremaine and Drizella instead. Zap! They were turned into toads. After Anastasia used the wand to change back into her true self, she and Cinderella returned it to the fairy godmother. Just then, the king spoke up. "Does anyone want to marry my son?" "I do," Cinderella replied with a smile. Soon, Cinderella and the prince were married. They lived happily ever after, all over again. Well, that's it for today. We'll see you next time.